Hello, welcome to the WME video blog. I'm David Parrish, and this is part two of a series we've just started called The Process of Transition. And so, in the previous video, and if you're just watching this for the first time, go to my video. If you're seeing this on Facebook or something, you just go to YouTube and click on, type in my name, David Parrish, and you'll see I've got 70 some odd videos. Click on it, and it's the video right before this. You'll want to watch the previous video. But this is the process of transition part two. We're talking about Elijah, where our text is 1 Kings chapter 19. And quickly, the background is all in the previous video, but what I'm going to be giving you is 5 principles of transition. That if you're going through a transition, if you're looking for a new way of doing things, if you think that God is leading you to do things in a new way, you need to understand the principles of transition. And so here's some principles that I see in the ministry of Elijah. Elijah was called to transform a nation. And he had a confrontation with Ahab, and the fire had fallen. But the next day, the wicked Queen Jezebel was still on the throne, and she's threatening him, and he ran because it seemed like the way he thought things were going to change, there was a great move of God. The fire fell and burned up the sacrifice. And some people turned to Yahweh. But as a whole, the nation did not. You see, here's the point. We sometimes think that what's going to change our nation or our nations, wherever you're watching this, is an event. If we could just have an event. But really, it's a process, not an event. And if you can come to the place where you understand that our nation is going to be discipled, not in an event, but in a process. You know, a few years ago, some of people, especially that were prophets or claim to be prophets, and I'm not saying that they're not or that they missed it, but I think that even prophets sometimes don't understand what it is they're talking about. There were people saying God's going to send a great move. There's going to be a great move, and it's going to be there's going to be stadiums are going to be filled with people, stadiums. And so everybody thinks a big event, stadiums, and the truth about it is, what if instead of stadiums, the nation changes in coffee shops all over the place? What about instead of 15 big stadiums, what if there are 15,000 coffee shops? What if instead of one big event that everybody rushes to the altar, if it's one-on-one and it spreads as a movement through the nation? You see, God can do things in more ways than one. And I think that's what God was doing here with Elijah. Elijah was thinking, we'll have one big fire-falling event and the nation will be saved. And guess what? They had one big fire-falling event and the nation wasn't saved. But it was the beginning of a process. And Elijah had to go through a transition in the way he thought, a transition in what he did, a transition in terms of how he ministered, a transition of what his primary task was, a transition of how he measured success. He had to go through all kinds of things in terms of transition. Well, Elijah was discouraged, and Elijah ran. And Elijah found himself somewhere, and he prayed to die. Verse 4 of 1 Kings chapter 19 says, he went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die and said, it is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. And I want to stop there for just a moment because I want to give you the first 2 principles right now in this video, the first 2 principles that you need to understand about transition. If you're about to enter, if you're in the midst of transition, if you're leaving one job and going to the other, if you're leaving one strategy and going to the other, here's 2 things you need to understand. Here's the first one. The first principle of the process of transition is this. Number 1, the purpose of transition is His kingdom. The purpose of transition is his kingdom. You see, the very first phrase of the first request of the Lord's Prayer is, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." The purpose of transition is his kingdom. The transition involves you. It involved Elijah. It was a transition in Elijah's life, but it is not about you. It is not about Elijah. Let me say that again. Please listen to this carefully. The transition that God is leading you through is not, he is leading you through, and it's you going through transition. It's going to change the way you think, the way you act, the way you minister. It's going to change your agenda. It's going to change your strategy. That you're going through a transition, but the transition is still not about you. It's about him and his kingdom. When God, if it was just about you, he wouldn't have to listen. If it's just about you and you're being blessed, all he'd have to do is just bless you. Just let somebody walk in the door and hand you $1 million and then go do what you want to do. If it was just about you, there's no reason for you if it's just about you. If it's just about you being happy, then poof, be happy. But it's not about you. It's not about me, and it wasn't about Elijah. This was not about, it was a transition in Elijah's ministry, but it wasn't a transition about Elijah's ministry. It was a transition in Elijah's ministry, but it wasn't a transition about Elijah's ministry. It was about the kingdom of God. Here's the issue. The issue is not how can Elijah have a big meeting. He already had that on Mount Carmel. How can Elijah have a big anointed meeting? He already had that when the fire fell. How can Elijah have supernatural provision? He had that by the river, by the brook Cherith with the ravens and at the widow's house. This is not, God is already taking care of Elijah. This is not about Elijah. This transition is about what's it going to take to remove Jezebel from the throne? What's it going to take to remove Baal from Israel? What's it going to take to save Israel? What's it going to take to see not just transition, but transformation in the nation? God brings you through transition so that those you influence will experience transformation. God brings you through transition so that those you influence will experience transformation. You see, the issue is not your transition. The issue is their transformation. It's his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's getting Israel saved in Elijah's day. It's getting America saved. It's getting the United States saved in our day. It's seeing Honduras have a CPM and a disciple-making movement that transforms it. It's seeing greater Latin America come to Jesus Christ. It's seeing closure on the Great Commission happen worldwide. What's it going to take to get Matthew 24:14? This gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness to all nations, and then the end shall come. What's it going to take to make that happen? What's it going to take to make that happen? That's what it's about. It's not about you. It's about his kingdom. Even your transition is not about you. Your transition is about God doing things in and through you in such a way that it produces transformation in your culture. Transition is not about transition, it's about transformation. And it's not about you, it's about others. It's about his kingdom coming in this world. And that's the most important thing I can tell you about. That's the number one principle. And by the way, let that encourage you. As you may be going through transition. Transition many times is not comfortable. There's questions. I know when I was going through transition a few years ago from one way of doing ministry to the new way, I had all kinds of questions. How are we going to survive? You know, my daughter's finishing high school, going to college, getting married. How are we going to keep, God, how's the organization going to keep functioning? How are we going to stay afloat? God has, and boy, in the middle of transition, there was some tight times, and there was times when I cried out to God and said, God, I don't believe you've called me out here to let me sink, God. But we were going through transition, and transition can be an uncertain time. But understand this. We understand this, that He'll bring you through, because it's really not about you. It's about His kingdom. And so I want to encourage you today, what you're going through in transition, even if you're going through, you're just hanging on with your fingernails, if that's where you're at in transition, simply understand that it's about His kingdom. And continue to walk through the process of transition, and don't give up and don't quit. You've got a word from God. Keep moving in it. You haven't seen the fruit of it yet, but keep moving in it, because why? Because it's ultimately going to result in transformation in people's lives and His kingdom being demonstrated in people's lives. Number one principle is the purpose of transition is His kingdom. And so don't be discouraged. You're a part of something bigger than you. And continue to move forward, because it's about His kingdom. That's the first principle. Now, I want to go on and say the second principle too. By the way, so where do you get that out of this text? Well, Elijah, in verse 4, said, "It is enough, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." You're right, Elijah. You're right. And it's not about you. If you keep listening, if you'll continue listening, you'll find what my agenda is. You'll see what I'm doing. Now, second principle is this. Here it is. Number 2, a mixture of success and failure is the springboard to transition. A mixture of success and failure is the springboard to transition. What am I talking about? Many times we come into the moment that we enter transition is right after there's been a mix of success and yet failure. There's been a big success and yet, there's a disappointment. Now, that's exactly what happened with Elijah here. Here in Elijah's life, he was successful. My goodness. He had just prayed and there was a 3-year drought. God said, go and call them together. They came together at Mount Carmel. The fire fell. Biggest meeting ever, just awesome. People are screaming out, Jehovah is God, Jehovah is God. And then he prays and the rain comes. And so what a success. Where was the mixture of failure? Upon further analysis, it didn't bring transformation. It was an event, but it didn't get the job done. Jezebel was still on the throne. There were still many more false prophets. There were many people still worshiping Baal. All of Israel didn't turn to God in spite of the big event. They had seen a demonstration. They had heard a message, but they hadn't been discipled. There was not a genuine, deep, embedded change in the nation. And the nation was still going to hell in a handbasket just like it was before the fire fell. And we could say the same thing in America today, couldn't we? Have we had success? Well, we've got some of the largest churches in the world, and not as large as other places, but great big church growth. The last many years have been years of church growth. Look around America. Christian television, Christian radio, Christian books, Christian this, Christian that, Christian the other. And guess what? Have there been great crusades? Yes. Have there been great evangelists? Yes. Have there been great moves of God? Yes. Have there been great revivals? Yes. And let me ask you a question. Where's America today? Going to hell in a handbasket. Is our culture moving closer to God? No. It's moving further from God. Do we have a moral majority anymore? No. We have an immoral majority. And we're not, and a nation. Our nation has not been discipled. We are having event after event after event. Ministry success. The biggest and best financed ministry organizations in the history of the world centered here. while the nation slips into hell. It's a mixture, isn't it, of success and failure. And we can see that what we're doing, as successful as it is not transforming the nation. And that's a clear sign that a transition in the way things are done is needed. Look, and it's the old thing. I think I've heard different ones credited, but somebody said Einstein says that to continue to do the same thing and expect different results is a form of insanity. And it seems like many of God's people are afflicted with this virus because it's like we can see that we're slipping away, that it's going the opposite way, that our culture is going 1,000 miles an hour in the opposite direction. And yet we continue to do everything the same way. And even when we have success, we're having great success in building organizations. We're just having a lot of failure when it comes to actually changing the culture. So there's a need for transition. That's exactly what was going on in Elijah's day. The way that he saw it, the last time we had a big revival, it was on a mountain. The way it always was done on Mount Sinai, and the fire and the smoke and the voice of God. That's the way God does things, man. Moses can tell you that. And then, Samuel, and they'd have great thing, thunder and lightning, and here's our Ebenezer, and 1 Samuel, great move of God. And so here we are again. The way God's going to change our nation, there's only one way. It's got to be on a mountain, and there's got to be fire falling. And Elijah got to the mountain, and he got the fire to fall, and the nation stayed the same. And he was discouraged. But really, this was an opportunity for God to begin a work of transition in his life. A mix of success and failure is the springboard to transition. My friend and mentor David Watson tells his story, and if you haven't read the book by David and Paul Watson, Contagious Disciple Making, please get that book. It's awesome. A great description of the strategy that we're involved in Latin America, and that they have seen exponential fruit around the world. But in his early days as a missionary, he had some success, and he planted several churches. I remember him telling us this story, that he planted several churches, but then he had a great failure as he went to minister among a people group in India. And in a season of discouragement, success in the way he knew to do things, followed by failure in results in this new context. And sitting there in the dark, the Lord spoke to him and said, if you listen to me, I'll show you how to plant churches. And God began to give him a new strategy, which was really an old strategy in the Word of God. The disciple-making movement strategy began to emerge. And if you want to know what that's all about, like I said, get David and Paul's book, Contagious Disciple Making. But I'm just saying to you that mix of success and failure, if you're there, if you're seeing some success, if you're there, if you're seeing some things break through, but you're also aware that really the results are not coming, if you're also aware that you're not seeing the transformation in people's lives, then God may be speaking to you and saying, no, he's not saying be discouraged. He's not saying quit. He's saying listen. Listen and learn something new. But don't just say it's got to be the old way. A combination of success and failure may be a call from God for you to open your mind and heart to the possibility that he's calling you to transition. Well, that's all I'm going to give you in this video, and we're going to come back to it in the next one. But once again, the purpose of transition is not about you, it's about his kingdom. So be encouraged. Number 2, a mix of success and failure is the springboard to transition. Now, next time we're going to talk about how God will work with you, yourself, as you begin a process of transition. What's the first thing God does as he's leading you into a season of transition? That'll be next time on the WME Video Blog. God bless you. Have a great week.